On this day in history, November 13th, 1486, Johann Eck, German theologian and academic, is born. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, going over the history of the academic. Johann Meyer Eck, born 1486, died 1543, German theologian and most indefatigable and important opponent of Martin Luther, who was born on November 13th, 1486, at Eck, Swabia. His father, Michael Meyer, was a peasant and bailiff, Amtmann, of the village. His uncle, Martin Meyer, parish priest at Rothenburg on the Neckar, sent him at the age of 12 to the University of Heidelberg, later on to Tübingen, Cologne, and Freiburg im Breisgau. At the age of 24, he was already doctor and professor of theology. During this period, he was known as an opponent of the scholastic philosophy, and though he did not go to all lengths with the modernists, moderni, of his day, his first work, Logicis Exercitamenta, 1507, was on their side, an attitude which brought him into conflict with the university senate. His position in Freiburg becoming intolerable, he accepted in 1510 an invitation from the Duke of Bavaria to fill the theological chair at Ingolstadt, where he was destined for 30 years to exercise a profound influence as teacher and vice-chancellor, proconsular. A ducal commission appointed to find a means for ending the interminable strife between the rival academic parties entrusted Eck with the preparation of fresh commentaries on Aristotle and Petrus Hispanus, and between 1516 and 1520, in addition to his other duties, he published commentaries on the Summae of Hispanus and on the Dialectics, Physics, and other lesser scientific works of Aristotle, which became the textbooks of the university. These commentaries are inspired with much of the scientific spirit of the new learning, but he had no sympathy with the revolutionary attitude of the reformers. He had won laurels in a public disputation at Augsburg in 1514, when he defended the lawfulness of putting out capital at interest, again at Bologna in 1515 on the same subject and on the question of predestination, and these triumphs had been repeated at Vienna in 1516. These successes gained him the patronage of the Fuggers, and he found himself fairly launched as the recognized apologist of the established order in church and state, the first fruits of this new position being a quite gratuitous attack on his old friend, the distinguished humanist and jurist Ulrich Zasius, 1461 to 1536, for a doctrine proclaimed 10 years before, and a simultaneous assault on Erasmus's Annotatinis in Novum Testamentum. Luther sent to Eck in 1517 copies of his celebrated 95 Theses. Eck made no public reply, but in 1518 he circulated privately, at first, his Obeliski, in which Luther was branded as a Hussite. Luther entrusted his defense to Karlstadt, who answered Eck in 400 distinct theses, and declared his readiness to meet him in public disputation, which took place at Leipzig in 1519. On June 27th and 28th, and on July 1st and 3rd, Eck disputed with Karlstadt on the subjects of grace, free will, and good works, ably defending the Roman standpoint. From July 4th to 14th, he engaged with Luther on the absolute supremacy of the papacy, purgatory, penance, etc., showing a brilliant display of patristic and consular learning against the reformers' appeals to Scripture. The arbitrators declined to give a verdict, but the general impression was that victory rested with Eck. He made Luther admit that there was some truth in the Hussite opinions and declare himself against the Pope. He induced the universities of Cologne and Louvain to condemn the reformers' writings, but failed to enlist the German princes, and in January 1520 went to Rome to obtain strict regulations against those whom he called Lutherans. He was created a Protonotary Apostolic, and in July returned to Germany as Papal Nuncio, with the bull Exsurge Domine directed against Luther's writings. He now thought that he could crush not only the Lutheran heretics, but also his humanist critics. The effect of the publication of the bull, however, soon undeceived him, and he was glad to escape from Saxony with a whole skin. In his wrath he appealed to force, and his Epistolo ad Corolum V, February 18, 1521, called on the emperor to take measures against Luther, a demand soon to be responded to the Edict of Worms. In 1521 and 1522, Eck was again in Rome, reporting on the results of his nunciature. On his return from his second visit, he was the prime mover in the promulgation of the Bavarian Religious Edict of 1522, which led to years of persecution. In return for this action of the Duke, Eck obtained for him, during a third visit to Rome in 1523, valuable ecclesiastical concessions. Meanwhile, he published the 8 considerable polemics between 1522 and 1526. Luther declined to answer his arguments, and Eck turned his attention to Switzerland and the Zwinglians. At Baden and Aargau, in May and June 1526, a public disputation on the doctrine of transubstantiation was held, in which Eck and Thomas Murner were pitted against Johann Oclampadius. Though Eck claimed the victory in the argument, the only result was to strengthen the Swiss in their memorial view of the Holy Communion, and so to diverge them further from Luther. At the Augsburg Diet in 1530, Eck was charged by Charles V to draw up, in concert with 20 other theologians, the refutation of the Protestant confession. He was at the Colloquy of Worms in 1540, and at the Diet of Regensburg, Ratisbon, in 1541. At Worms he showed some signs of a willingness to compromise, but at Regensburg he persuaded the Catholic princes to reject the interim. Eck died at Engelstadt on February 10, 1543. He was a powerful debater, but his victories were those of a dialectician rather than a convincing reasoner, and in him depth of insight and conviction were ill replaced by the controversial violence characteristic of the age. Moreover, even after discounting the bias of his enemies, there is evidence to prove that his championship of the Church was not wholly due to the zeal for Christianity, for he was notoriously drunken, unchaste, avaricious, and almost insanely ambitious. His chief work was De Primatu Petri, 1519, his Enchiridion Locorum Communium Adversus Lutherum ran through 46 editions between 1525 and 1576. In 1530-35 he published a collection of his writings against Luther, Opera contra Lutherum, in 4 volumes.